much, Steve. There should be no real and sustained pleasure in always hearing from people who hold the same views as you do, or persons who are confirmed atheists. One of my friends described such persons as ardent atheists. He described himself as an ardent atheist. If we only had people of the same view, it would be the converted speaking to the converted. So it would become rather boring and bad for your own logical and rhetorical skills. I mean, there should be a special pleasure in hearing other points of view, in testing how other people think, in challenging them perhaps, and refining or reinforcing your own views.
Excuse me, I think your microphone isn't working.
You might have to come closer, Peter.
Okay. For much of my life, I was religious to a degree. Not from. Is anyone from the Jewish community? Right, brother? Okay. There was a character in Fiddler on the Roof called Frumacera. Frum means very religious. So I wasn't frum, but I wasn't irreligious. My family was a Jewish family living like your president on the northern beaches. And there was no Jewish place of worship there. So we were pretty non-observant. We were nevertheless proud of being Jewish. Now, it's said, what can 10 cobblers do that 9 rabbis can't? And the answer is pray. A minion, that is 10 men. It's one of the myriad of silly rules that exist. And by the way, it's sexist too. But my father was a minion man when he was growing up. That is to say, he and his brothers lived close to the local synagogue. And they were called for whenever there weren't 10 men to make up a minion for a special occasion requiring prayers. And they brought the numbers up to 10. So he was a minion man. And grandfather had been associated with many Zionist groups before the state of Israel became a reality. And for me, there were Jewish parents, there was circumcision, there had been a bar mitzvah when I was 13 years old, and in the early 1970s there was a religious congregation on which I served on the board of management. Now, we fired the rabbi and we employed another one. It's all done locally in the Jewish community. We then won the ensuing court case and we built a new synagogue with a new rabbi. Now, during this time, I was a believer and I attended shul sometimes. I enjoyed the rituals. I took part in the charitable activities. I went into Parliament with a yarmulke. I wore a yarmulke every day for prayers. I was always sworn in on a Jewish Bible. I once said prayers for everyone in the Senate. I took the oath rather than affirmation when I was sworn in, and I was absent from the Senate on Jewish holy days. Now, your president wrote a book and had it published. It's called The Man Who Invented God, and it's about Moses. It's an intellectually satisfying book, and if you haven't read it, you probably should read it. His arguments are fairly convincing to me. But let me add that my religion was never an issue within my party. It was never a matter of comment. People just accepted that I was Jewish and left it at that. The parliamentary whips made proper arrangements for the days I was not in attendance. And probably the party was pleased to be able to say that one of its parliamentarians was Jewish. We used to call our corner of the Senate with the Jew, the Refo, the Abo, and the Rebel. We used to call it Cockroach Corner. But the Jewish community embraced me because I held elected office and because I continued to win pre-selection. And there was an invitation each year to attend one of the great Orthodox synagogues as an honoured guest on one of the high holy days. My wife was accepted, and she's non-Jewish, because people liked her. Very easy to like her. And because we're a happy couple. But there's still a Jewish congregation in Chatswood to which I belong. Well, the membership money that I pay is useful to them for things that are done locally. And Jewish congregations are self-funding. But there's no attendance by me at the events held by that congregation. But you're going to hear more about that. And there are still Jewish charities, well, they do no harm. And there's been service on the Wayside Chapel at King's Cross, on the Alzheimer's Association of New South Wales, and as an official visitor to psychiatric hospitals. Now, it's interesting that so much of the good and worthy charity work takes place under the auspices of religious bodies. Think about that. Now, we saw a film on the AIDS epidemic recently in a student class which I take, and the Catholic Sisters of Mercy at St Vincent's Hospital came out of it so well, so caring, and so compassionate. They only withdrew from the injecting room at King's Cross when they were instructed to by very senior church figures. And the Wayside Chapel on which I served for about 10 years exists under the auspices of the Uniting Church. It was interesting. We opened the first heroin injecting room in the Wayside Chapel. We had one Uniting Church minister inside opening the injecting room, and another Uniting Church minister outside railing against us. He's still in the Parliament. So, under the religions and the religious beliefs which they carry, there's a lot of good social activity and there are some good social attitudes. But if the cattle trucks were taking Jews away, as they did in Hitler's Germany and European Empire, then this person, there's no doubt, this person would be on one of the first cattle trucks. Now for the Epiphany. Well, what's that word anyhow? Now, it's described in one document as an experience of sudden and striking revelation. And such a thing happened to me. The trouble with catastrophes like the Holocaust, and that was pretty awful, was that they represent the evil activities of human beings towards other human beings. And my religious friends have no difficulty in invoking free will for humans to do good or evil as the explanation for what happened. Mind you, an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing God would not have allowed it to happen, would not have allowed humans to act that way towards other humans. But we waive that point, as the Pirate King said. It's the disasters of nature that can't be explained by free will. So, when the Asian tsunami occurred the Epiphany happened. Now you remember the Asian tsunami. It was an earthquake under the sea. Two tectonic plates collided and they caused the tsunami. And it killed about 250,000 people, and it ravaged many communities. Among the victims were families that were separated, innocent children and babies that were either killed by the wave or sucked out to sea by the aftermath, and there was much damage to towns and villages and infrastructure. There were communities that were torn apart, and most of those affected were relatively blameless. By the way, we put the question, how did the Holocaust happen, to certain learned rabbis, and they said it was to atone for the sins of previous generations. Well, that's disgusting, if you ask me. And anyhow, the Asian tsunami was all due to an act of nature, that is, an act of God, in which no human part was played. Now, the Epiphany occurred when these questions were put again. How could an all-good, all-knowing, all-powerful God have allowed this to happen? Free will couldn't be invoked in that event. Human beings had no part in causing it. It was no longer possible to accept what the rabbis said, that God is all good, all-knowing and all-powerful. At least one of those three propositions must be incorrect. So, a letter was written to my rabbi inviting him to answer the question, how could he assert what he was asserting in light of the Asian tsunami? Well, he couldn't. And the letter I got back made it clear that he couldn't. He actually wrote a sermon about that letter. It didn't matter. He couldn't answer the questions. And that was the end of my religious observance. It was not the end of my Jewishness, because Hitler would determine that very quickly. Anyway, there are many, many secular Jews in Sydney who don't believe but pay their money. And belonging to a community merely helps with its financing. But my wife and I are both now intellectually adherents of leading non-believers. We don't belong and won't belong to any atheistic movement, just as we're not going to belong to any religious movement. I'm a member of a congregation, but I'm not religious. There's too much Jewish baggage just to throw it all out. Say, I want nothing more to do with the community. Anyhow, someone might advise me on this. Just suppose there was a Big Bang to start the universe. The question arises, what was in place before the Big Bang, and how did the Big Bang happen? And no answers to those questions are yet known to me. And a leading religious commentator, and you'd all know from television, a woman named Rachel Conn, made clear to me that my arguments are pretty powerful against the biblical God, the God of the Bible, but they're not so powerful against the idea of a deity. That's what she said. Well, that was my epiphany and where it led. It led to a question, to a non-answer. The interesting thing was that it took so long for it to happen. But now let's go to some philosophy of science, just for a moment. Karl Popper taught that what is science is that which is disprovable. Now, religious belief is often not disprovable, and so it is not science. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. It's just not science. But, for example, Christian science, it's a self-contradictory phrase. Can't have it. And Thomas Kuhn is the other philosopher of science who taught us that we progress in understanding as paradigms change and as scientific revolutions occur. You all know about that. Now, it seems to me that paradigms have got some changing to do for religion. And change is not a thing that it seems to me religions are very good at. Remember that it took the Catholic Church 350 years to admit that Galileo had been right. And religious language has got to change too. Some of the language is simply, obviously wrong. I mean, as a doctor, I can't sit with someone dying inch by inch of cancer and have a padre tell me that God is love. It doesn't square with what I'm seeing at the bedside. It does seem that the great issues of religion and belief, though, are just beyond my understanding. All I know is that conventional biblical religious belief is unlikely to be correct. What is correct is another question. I don't really know what's correct. So, agnosticism, not knowing, might be where I am today. It was the point that Albert Einstein reached. He just said, I don't know. Now, there's a curtain across the end of the room, and I can't see what's behind the curtain. Some of my friends think they can. But can you? Can you really? Or does ardent atheism require faith too? Thank you.
Is there any questions or comments that people might like to make?
I have a question, please. I'm fascinated by your use of the phrase relatively blameless. What does that mean?
Well, I think they were blameless, but some people might want to argue that they'd done something, but I think a lot of the people who were killed by the Asian tsunami were blameless people. And I think many of the people killed in the Holocaust were blameless. I just used the word relatively just to let some of my religious friends off the hook a bit.
I've dabbled a little bit in Buddhist philosophy and that, and I've thought, thoughts occurred to me, well, if there's a God to decide who's an out-group, who's an in-group, what if people were born next life as their enemies? And does that, we could have been born in Germany at that time, we could have been born a Jew at that time. What type of a God would decide?
I go further. Did you see a comic strip the other day showing St. Peter? And the entrance into heaven, he had one side saying for the right religion, one side saying for the wrong religions. And he was saying, I don't think they see the joke. And they were all going in the door saying the right religion. But it will have struck you that if certain religions are right, other ones must be wrong. And I can't get over the fact that Shiites are killing Sunnis. Sunnis are killing Shiites. But then I look back and I find that Protestants were killing Catholics and Catholics were killing Protestants. No different. It's all ridiculous.
Why do you think religions are slow to change just because they oppose science when they obviously evolve? Like they evolve over a period of time, you know, to fit the things. They do change all the time.
It beggars belief that they're so slow.
When they need to change, they do change. The Catholic Church, when it needs to change, will change. That's why they survive, because they evolve all the time.
Yeah, but they don't really. How many of you here have read a novel called People of the Book? Yeah. Do you remember they had a little thing about a priest saying the heliocentric heresy? And of course it's not a heresy, it's Copernicus and Galileo. But it was taught as a heresy then.
That's a religious rejection of science, though. They don't change in respect to science.
No.
Perhaps, but they change with respect to each other. I mean, the Catholic Church has just come out and said, you know, the Jews are no longer responsible for the crucifixion of Christ, but however long that was. They do evolve and change.
You know, I think it was a political fight.
Well, politics is still
And the
evolution.
people who happened to be on the winning side were Jewish, yeah. Okay. By the way, Christ was a very good Jew too.
If he existed.
Did you know the Last Supper was in fact a Seder dinner? But everyone conveniently forgets that. But I was on an educational commission once, and we went to Catholic University. We were introduced to the head of theology, and I said, "Father, I've got a problem." He said, "What's your problem, son?" I said, "Well, the Bible says 5,750, and carbon dating says 60 or 80,000. Oh, he said, "That's easy." He said, "The Bible's wrong." That's what he said.
Recommend him to counting tree rings.
Well,
That goes back about 20,000 years.
Okay.
You only got to count them up.
but I then tried that story on George Pell, and my wife was having hysterics, thinking he was going to kill the priest. But Pell said, provided you'll accept that the Bible is divinely inspired, which I don't accept, then it can be wrong on history or science. Well, I thought that was a pretty good answer for him, I thought. So I don't know about the conventional religions, how they think. The other thing worth saying is that people have often got two different systems of belief. I think you were telling me about a friend who practices epidemiology and yet is deeply religious. So he's practicing epidemiology through a scientific set of beliefs, and he's doing his religion through a faith-based set of beliefs. And the two are quite separate, really. And you know, it's as if people take on different beliefs at different times of day and different times of the week.
You mentioned the Sisters of Charity being behind the Injecting Centre, or initially behind the Injecting Centre, King's Cross, and then Wayside Chapel. Do you think as religion declines, which it may be, charity and benevolence will fall out?
Okay. What worries me a bit is that a lot of the good things that happen under the banner of religious bodies. Now, that's not to say they couldn't occur under other banners. So, provided the other organisations evolve, I'm happy. At the moment, we don't seem to have a lot of them, though. I mean, it was incredible that the Uniting Church was willing to put a Jew on the committee of management of the Wayside Chapel. And they had to go to the Uniting Church to get permission. The Uniting Church said, no problem. No problem. Just take them on. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we had secular bodies that would take on a lot of these jobs? But there aren't a lot of them. Yeah.
Just wanted to make a comment that if you Google non-religious charities, if you're wondering about where your money is going to, there is a list
Well, wouldn't it be good if they emerged as major charities, to answer your question? Because I don't see why it has to be under the aegis of religious bodies.
Tony?
Thank you. I wondered about the synagogue community and secular law. Would you say that the Jewish community of your area always obeys secular law?
We have no problem with the secular law. We're Australians, and Australian law is our law. Is that it? I mean,
That's a relief.
Certain other religions want religious law to take precedence, and I'm not in favour of that. I think if we live in Australia, then Australian law is what counts.
Thank you.
My mother was Jewish, but non-practicing. My father was Protestant, and I was brought up as an Anglican, and then I became atheist. So, anyway, the question that I have is that what does it really mean to be Jewish if it's not Judaism? I think it's just an agreement to join a group.
I think it is. I'm not Jewish in the religious sense, and if that's so, it's merely belonging to a group.
Do you have a special handshake for like, can you tell with, I think,
No,
how do you work out who's got
I'm damned if I know.
that handshake?
Professor Baume,
Yeah.
you talk about losing your faith and retaining an identity as a cultural Jew, and most people wouldn't blink and they would say that's a very conventional thing to occur. However, if a person said that they were a Christian and they lost their faith, if they then referred to themselves as a cultural Christian, it would be regarded as odd. Do you think it's possible to be a cultural Christian and a non-believer?
I've never thought of it. You have a different financing system. I only remain in the Jewish community to help with the finance. That's all. Support some of their charities, belong to a congregation. I don't attend. And wouldn't it be nice if that was possible for a lot of other people who want no part of religious belief, but they want to be part of some of the good things that go on? I don't know if it's possible. Is it possible?
Yeah, it is. In some other countries that Christians are in minority, there are some non-believers that are from Christian background, but this is why the minorities can survive, can hold together, and for example in my country, I'm from Iran, there are some Christians, Armenians, or the other believers from Christian groups. They are coming together, they live together, they marry together, and this is how they survive. They are Christian, they have the Christian background. They are not, possibly some of them are not Christian, but they'll stay there and they'll keep their contact with each other, because they are minorities, they want to survive.
That's
Jewish people also, I believe that they are minorities. So they want to keep their own, something that binds them to each other. They don't want to lose their connections. If they dissolve in the bigger society, they don't want to do that. So they'll keep their origin as a group of the people. In other countries that the Christians are minority, possibly less than 1%, there are some non-believers that are from the Christian background.
That's really very interesting. Do you remember the play Fiddler on the Roof, where the third daughter went off and changed her religion so she could marry a Christian bloke? Do you remember that? Her father had to say, well, there is no other side. Do you remember that? You know, and I think that's bad.
Professor Baume, in relation to what the gentleman said, I'd like to suggest that it is possible to be cultural Christians, and there are probably very many people in Australia who are socially liberal and who believe in evidence-based policy and who don't have any strong religious conviction, but who would regard themselves as culturally Christian, maybe for some family or historical reason, and who in every other sense are allies to the values and aims of atheists.
See, I think that is also very interesting.
Would you want your kids to be raised reading the Torah or having some understanding of Jewish morality or historical Jewish ideas towards treating each other?
But you see, I believe that at the end of the day, people are free to make their own decisions based on how they work things out, and that includes my kids. Having said that, most people take the religion of their parents, don't they? At least initially, at least until they start thinking for themselves. But I'm quite clear that decisions belong to people, and that includes decisions about religion. Can I go back to Iraq for a minute? One of the things I picked up was that there's a fair bit of oppression based on someone's religious allegiance. Just so you know, my own view is that people should not be punished for that kind of thing. What they might be judged for are things very definitely within their control. If someone's a thief or someone, has been a wastrel, that's within their own control. But the colour of their skin and religion, often not within their control.
Professor Baume, is it right that in the Jewish religion people are not supposed to eat things such as halal certified foods or food certified religious, passed as religious by other or approved by other religions?
They talk about kosher food, don't they?
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, kosher is one thing, but what about, is it okay for Jewish people to eat what is halal to the Islamic?
Okay, I don't know. But I'll tell you a joke that was going around. They said, what's the difference between a very orthodox congregation and a reform congregation? Well, they'd say it goes like this. In a very orthodox congregation, the bride's mother is likely to be pregnant. In an orthodox congregation, the bride is likely to be pregnant. In a reform congregation, the rabbi is likely to be pregnant. And that's how it goes. Yes is the answer. There are food restrictions. The book of Leviticus lays down all these silly rules, and I think they are silly. But they're there.
It was a two-part question. I was wondering if you're finding anything left to eat.
No.
When you went from believing in the Jewish tradition and using that as even if it's only in the background as a guiding light for your life, when you actually transitioned to losing that faith, did you experience a personal sense of loss for a framework of living?
The answer is yes, because there was a certain amount of pleasure and solidarity, for example, in going to High Holy Day services. And if you simply couldn't do that, because you reckon it was a lot of nonsense, then you'd lose all that comradeship and friendship. And so there was a sense of loss. But mind you, I was fairly old. when that decision occurred. And I mean, my wife, for example, said, well, thank goodness you reached that decision. Yeah.
Considering your time in politics as a bit of experience, do you consider at all key religious figures like Moses, Jesus and Muhammad as probably political leaders and political people who were using their foundations of religion to put forward their political beliefs?
Yeah. Answer is I don't know enough about them, but what I think is they were basically good people, and a lot of very efficient politicians have followed them and have tried to recruit their beliefs into political systems. Don't think much of that either.
You were recognised as one of the few small L Liberal members of the Liberal Party.
And the blood is everywhere.
Has your epiphany changed your political views and your membership of that party?
There is nothing wrong with there being a Conservative Party in Australia. I mean, however, it's not my party. So, when it became a Conservative Party, I left. I wished them well, but did my own thing and went away. So, there's no place for small L Liberals today, except we're keeping a little flame burning because the wheel keeps turning, and our day will come again. I hope.
They're just called the Labor Party.
Yeah, and by the way, I will be political to this extent. It's got to be more than just slogans.
Yes, of course.
It's got to relate to programs and purpose as well.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, I just have just a comment. Like, just going back to when you first started talking about suffering and that religions often want to give a reason for suffering. So many years ago, I read a book by Rabbi Krishna about why bad things happen to good people. And like every religion, I guess, to suffer you need to have a reason, and there needs to be a good reason. So I think that's where comfort comes in with religion, because there is a good reason for me to suffer because there's a reward.
But I don't think they're right.
Yeah.
I think they're wrong in what they say, and they start off with a basic belief, first belief, that their religion is correct.
Exactly.
And everything they do after that is trying to justify that belief. I actually think the evidence for that first belief is pretty poor.
Well, look, I'd like to, on behalf of all of us, thank Peter Baume very, very much for his presentation. It was very enlightening, and we're absolutely thrilled to have Peter with us. Thank you.